So for lesson 3, we are going to be using some more postulates and theorems to expand our triangle congruence proofs. So we're going to start using side, 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 angle, side in today's lesson. So you might need some of these postulates and theorems as we move forward. So it might be a good idea to review some of the most important ones to make sure that we can prove triangles congruent. So like we had mentioned, I think in lesson 1, the reflexive postulate says that when a quantity is equal or congruent to itself, when triangles share a side or an angle. So if you have two triangles and that are side by side and you highlight them in two different colors, the side that has both colors, so in this case this one that has both the purple and the green, that we could say that BD is congruent to BD. Why? Because of reflexive. So here we can see, before I even start writing out the proofs, I'm going to start marking everything up. MN is congruent to PN. So I have marked it here. LM is congruent to LP. Again, you're going to mark it, use 2 tick marks here. So now we have the two sides are congruent. Now, before I even start writing everything out, I want to start figuring out what theorem I'm going to use. So because I've highlighted these in 2 different colors, the colors kind of blended, but if you look, you can see that right here, LN has 2 different colors. So you know that LN is going to need the reflexive postulate. LN is going to be equal to LN. So based off of this, we'll know that there are 3 congruent sides in both triangles. So I know that my game plan is I'm going to use side, side, side. So how do we write this out? Start with your given information. Use the reflexive postulate to say that LN is congruent to LN. There should be little lines over all of these. Let me fix that. Because these are segments. And then we can say, because of this, there are 3 congruent sides, side, 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 so the 2 triangles are congruent. So some important information as we start writing more and more proofs, right? Read the given and start marking up the diagram. I would mark things up before you start writing things down, just so you have a game plan. Circle or highlight important vocabulary words. That might include midpoint, bisector, right? Among others. Check off each given you use as you go. If you have multiple givens, it might get a little confusing, so give a little check as you mark things down, right? I recommend using your highlighters to highlight the triangles in 2 different colors. That will really make it pop when you need to use reflexive, right? Keep track of the corresponding parts of your triangle so you know which theorem to use. And again, your last line of your proof should be what you are trying to prove. That is your end goal. So we did side, side, side. That was our first example. Like we had talked about yesterday in our brief reference, side, angle, side is another way that you could do this. So here is a good example of side, angle, side. You have congruent side, angle in the middle, congruent side finishing the sandwich. Here, this triangle looks good. However, this one, you can see that the angle is outside. So there's a side, and then an angle sort of out on its own. So the angles must both be between the congruent corresponding sides. So you would have needed that angle F is congruent to angle B in order to use side, angle, side. So let's do an example. I first highlighted my triangles in 2 different colors. Start marking off your given information. Angle A and angle C are congruent, so I have an angle. AB is equal to BC, so I have a side and an angle. And you know that BD bisects AC. So bisects splits into 2 congruent segments. So I can mark it off that those two are going to be congruent. Therefore, I know I'm going to use side, angle, side. Right? You might think, oh, but like this is reflexive. You could also mark this and then do side, 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 but you cannot do SSA. You cannot do side, side, angle. That is not going to work, right? So first start with your given information. Then you can state that AD is congruent to DC by the definition of a bisector. So this is one of your sides. And then the other side and angle are given to you. So you can go right off and say that the triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. For number 3, CD bisects AB. So before I read the second one, I'm going to mark. So CD bisects AB. So these two pieces are congruent. So I have a side. AB bisects CD. So similarly, we have two congruent pieces here. So I already have a side and a side. Now I'm going to know that these two angles are congruent because they are vertical angles. So I have to first state that they are vertical angles and then they are congruent. And because of this, I will be able to use side, angle, side. So start by writing out your given information. You have to state that these two bisectors create two sets of congruent sides. First, state that the angles are vertical, angle CEB and angle DEA are vertical. Make sure that your order is correct. C maps to D. E is the same in both, A and B. You can then say that the angles are congruent because they are vertical, and then state that the triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. For number 4, this symbol again, perpendicular. Make sure you are studying your vocabulary so you know what these symbols mean. So because BD is perpendicular to AC, you have a set of right angles here. Right angles are always going to be congruent, so that's an easy one. You also know that BD bisects AC. So you have a set of congruent sides on the bottom because there are two equal parts. Now I didn't highlight here, probably for the sake of time, but if I were to highlight my two triangles, you would see that BD gets highlighted twice. So I can also use reflexive to state that BD is congruent to BD. So then I'll have a side, an angle, and a side. How do we write this out? Start with your given information. State that perpendicular lines form right angles. Those angles then must be congruent because all right angles are congruent. Use the bisector definition to state that AD is going to be congruent to DC. Reflexive to get BD is congruent to BD. And then we know that the triangles are congruent based off of side, angle, side.